The library was ancient, a massive vault of forgotten knowledge hidden deep beneath the surface of the planet. It stretched for miles underground, a maze of towering bookshelves, data vaults, and holographic archives. Thousands of years had passed since anyone had stepped inside its walls, and even now, its current inhabitants were not exactly human. Cara Solana, the librarian, stood in the center of it all. Her glasses sat precariously on the bridge of her nose as she clutched an old leather-bound book titled Librarian. Her hands trembled slightly, but not because of the cold air that circulated through the library. No, the reason for her unease was standing just a few feet away from her. A group of alien figures, towering and skeletal, with luminescent blue eyes and razor-sharp teeth that glinted with amusement. These creatures, the Ilmer, were relentless in their taunting, their thin fingers pointing at her as they snickered among themselves. "Look at her," one of them hissed, its voice like the sound of metal scraping against stone. "A mere human, tending to this ancient place as if it still matters." Cara shifted uncomfortably, her heart racing, but she kept her eyes forward, avoiding their gaze. The Ilmer were cruel, yes, but they had no idea who she really was. They didn't know that she was the last survivor of the Aller royal family, an alien dynasty long thought extinct. And they definitely didn't know the kind of power she still held. But they would. The Ilmer continued their cruel laughter, completely oblivious to the danger they were in. Cara's mind raced with memories she had long since buried. The Aller had ruled the galaxy with wisdom and strength for centuries, their empire spanning across hundreds of star systems. But their downfall had been swift and brutal. The Ilmer, once slaves in the Aller Empire, had risen up, their rebellion taking the galaxy by surprise. In the chaos, Cara had been spirited away by her family's most loyal allies, hidden on a distant, barren planet until the storm of war passed. But it never did. The Ilmer had obliterated the Aller, reducing their cities to dust and purging every trace of their existence from the galaxy. Cara had lived in exile, hiding her heritage, her knowledge, and most importantly, her power. It was only in the isolation of this ancient library that she had found a strange solace, a place to hide from her past, but also a place filled with untold secrets. Secrets that even the Ilmer, despite their arrogance, had yet to uncover. The Ilmer mockingly circled her desk, their skeletal frames casting elongated shadows across the walls, as if the very library itself was laughing with them. They had always seen her as nothing more than a strange curiosity, an odd human who seemed content cataloging books and maintaining an archive that they themselves deemed irrelevant. To them, she was harmless. They were wrong. One of the Ilmer, a taller figure with jagged scars etched into its metallic skin, leaned forward, sneering at her. "You cling to these ancient scrolls as if they mean something," it hissed. "Do you really believe they hold any value in this galaxy anymore, little human?" Cara's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let her fear show. "Books, knowledge, they've always held value," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with an underlying intensity. The Ilmer laughed again, the sound high-pitched and grating. They were so wrapped up in their mockery that they failed to notice the subtle change in the air. The lights above flickered, just for a second, and the hum of the ancient technology that kept the library functioning seemed to falter. Cara could feel it, the energy coursing through the walls, the floors, even the air itself. This library, this place of forgotten knowledge, held more than just books and data. It held power. Old, untapped power. Cara took a slow, deep breath and let her fingers run over the spine of the Librarian, feeling the ancient symbols carved into its cover. She had spent years in this library, learning, absorbing the lost knowledge of her people. The Aller were known for their mastery of energy manipulation, a skill that had been passed down through their royal bloodline. Cara had trained in secret, practicing in the shadows, always aware that the Ilmer were close, watching, but never understanding what she was truly capable of. And now, they would find out. The lead Ilmer, still grinning wickedly, turned away from her, signaling to the others. "Leave her," it barked, clearly bored of the game. "She's nothing." Cara's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. I'm not nothing, she whispered, too softly for them to hear. Her fingers tightened around the Librarian, and for a brief moment, her eyes flashed the same luminous blue as the Ilmer's. The room shifted. The faint hum of the library's systems grew louder, and the temperature seemed to drop. The Ilmer paused, sensing the change. But it was too late. Kara had been patient, so patient for so long. But now, as she stood surrounded by her tormentors, the time for patience was over. With a flick of her wrist, the book flew open, its pages turning at an impossible speed. Ancient words written in the language of the Aller filled the air, glowing with an ethereal light. The Ilmer hissed in confusion, their eyes widening as they realized something was wrong. But by then, the energy had already built to a crescendo. A blinding flash erupted from the book, and the entire library seemed to pulse with raw power. The Ilmer screamed, their skeletal forms thrown back by the force of the energy, crashing into the shelves and scattering books everywhere. Kara stood tall, her form radiating with the power of her ancestors, the library itself coming alive at her command. The leader of the Ilmer scrambled to its feet, eyes wild with fear. What are you?" it shrieked, but Kara didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand, and the air around the Ilmer shimmered, bending to her will. "I'm the last of the Aller," Kara said calmly, her voice echoing through the library. "And you've mocked me for the last time." The leader of the Ilmer gasped as the energy surrounding it grew denser, trapping it in place. The other Ilmer, too dazed and terrified to fight back, watched in horror as Kara took a step forward, her power crackling through the air like a storm ready to break. "For centuries, your kind has hunted us," Kara continued, her eyes glowing with intensity. "You destroyed my people, my family, but you forgot one thing: knowledge is power." And with that, Kara closed her fist, and the energy around the Ilmer leader exploded, consuming it in a burst of light. The remaining Ilmer screamed in terror, scrambling to escape the library, but the doors had already sealed themselves shut. There would be no escape for them now. Kara stood in the center of the chaos, the book still glowing in her hands, the power of the Aller coursing through her veins. She had spent so long hiding, so long pretending to be someone she wasn't. But now, the truth was out. She wasn't just a shy human librarian. She was the last of the royal family, and she was ready to reclaim what was hers. As the final Ilmer fell, the library returned to its eerie silence, the only sound the soft hum of the systems that powered it. Kara exhaled slowly, letting the power within her settle once more. But she knew this was only the beginning. The Ilmer weren't the only enemies out there, and now that she had revealed herself, others would come. She had to be ready. Clutching the Librarian to her chest, Kara turned and walked deeper into the library, her eyes scanning the shelves filled with ancient knowledge. Somewhere in these pages, there was a way to defeat the Ilmer for good, and she would find it, because she was no longer the hunted. She was the hunter. The library walls echoed with a newfound stillness, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the quiet after chaos, the kind that leaves something unsettling in the air. The Ilmer had been defeated, their bodies twisted and scattered amongst the ancient bookshelves, but Kara knew that her victory was just the first step. She looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly from the surge of power that had coursed through her veins. It was overwhelming, the kind of power she had kept buried for so long, and now that it had been unleashed, she felt like a dam had broken inside her. But there was no time to dwell on the feeling. The library's artificial lighting flickered back to its steady glow, casting long shadows that danced along the towering shelves. Kara's footsteps echoed softly as she walked deeper into the archive, her mind racing with questions. The Aller were gone, annihilated by the Ilmer's rebellion. How many others were left in the galaxy that knew of her existence? The Ilmer weren't fools, though their arrogance had blinded them to her identity until it was too late. Still, the galaxy was vast, and she couldn't afford to underestimate who else might be watching. As she moved through the narrow aisles, her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp hissing sound from one of the terminals at the far end of the room. Kara's eyes darted to the flickering screen, her heart skipping a beat. The library had been abandoned for centuries, its systems thought to be dead. Yet, here it was, a signal. She cautiously approached the console, her breath catching as the faint glow revealed a message she hadn't expected to see. Alert! Incoming transmission. The words blinked at her from the dimly lit display, and for a moment, she hesitated. This wasn't possible. The library had been disconnected from any communication networks long before the fall of her people. The idea that someone, somewhere, was attempting to reach her now sent a chill down her spine. She glanced around at the scattered remains of the Ilmer. Could this transmission be connected to them? Was there another wave of enemies on their way? The hesitation didn't last. Kara took a deep breath and activated the console, her fingers trembling over the controls. The screen flared to life, casting a pale blue glow across her face, and she braced herself for what she was about to see. But nothing could have prepared her for the image that appeared. It wasn't another Ilmer, nor was it some long-lost ally of the Aller. It was a human, a man, disheveled, with a scar running across his cheek, his eyes hollow with desperation. His voice crackled through the ancient system, barely intelligible through the static, but the words cut deep. Survivors, if you're out there, we need your help. They're coming. We can't hold them off much longer. Kara's breath caught in her throat as the transmission faded. She stared at the blank screen, her mind racing. Survivors? There were others out there. Humans, no less. And they were in trouble. But how had they known to reach out to the library? Was this an accident, a desperate shot in the dark? Or did they somehow know who, or what, she was? She glanced back at the Librarian, still tucked under her arm, its pages glowing faintly with the residual energy from her earlier battle. The power contained within that book was dangerous, but it was also a beacon of hope. Kara had spent years hiding from the galaxy, from her past, but now it seemed like fate had forced her hand. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. As she considered her next move, a faint rustling sound echoed from one of the dark corners of the library. Kara froze, her heart skipping a beat. She wasn't alone. Without turning her head, she spoke into the stillness, her voice sharp and commanding. "Come out. I know you're there." The silence stretched on for a few agonizing seconds before a figure emerged from the shadows. A small, wiry creature, distinctly not Ilmer. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, with large, dark eyes that blinked nervously in the dim light. It moved hesitantly, as if unsure whether to approach or flee. "Don't hurt me," it squeaked, holding up its thin arms in a gesture of surrender. "I'm not one of them." Kara's eyes narrowed. She had never seen a creature like this before, but her instincts told her it wasn't a threat. "Yet, who are you? What are you doing here?" she demanded, keeping her guard up. The creature wrung its hands nervously, its gaze darting around the room. I'm just a scavenger," it stammered. "I've been hiding in the lower levels of the library for years. I swear, I didn't mean any harm. I just wanted to survive." Kara watched it carefully, her mind racing. A scavenger? How had it survived down here for so long without being detected by the Ilmer? And more importantly, what did it know about the library's secrets? "I don't trust scavengers," Kara said coldly, taking a step closer. "Especially ones who conveniently show up after the Ilmer are dead." The creature flinched, but quickly shook its head, its eyes wide with panic. No, you don't understand. I've been hiding from them, too. I never wanted to cross paths with them. I was just looking for things to trade, to keep myself alive." Kara tilted her head, considering. It wasn't unusual for scavengers to pick through the remnants of ancient civilizations, hoping to find valuable artifacts or forgotten technologies. But something about this one seemed different. Its desperation wasn't entirely about survival. "What do you really want?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. The creature hesitated, its gaze flicking nervously to the side. I heard stories," it admitted, its voice barely above a whisper. "Stories about the Aller, about a hidden power buried deep in this library. Power that could change everything." Kara's heart skipped a beat. Of course, the scavenger wasn't just here by chance. It had been drawn to the same thing that had kept her here all these years. The forgotten knowledge of the Aller. The scavenger's eyes locked onto the Librarian, and its expression changed. It was no longer filled with fear, but with something more dangerous. Greed. That book, it breathed, taking a cautious step forward. That's it, isn't it? The key to the Aller's power. Kara's grip tightened on the book, her instincts screaming at her to be cautious. This is not something you can take or trade. It's more dangerous than you know. The scavenger smiled, a twisted, hungry grin that sent a shiver down Kara's spine. Dangerous? Or valuable? I bet there are a lot of people out there who'd pay a fortune for what's inside that book. You could be rich beyond your wildest dreams. Or we could be. Kara felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. The scavenger wasn't just some lost soul trying to survive. It was a vulture, circling her, waiting for the right moment to strike. I'm not interested in money, she said, her voice hardening. And neither should you be. The scavenger's grin faltered, but only for a moment. Come on now, it purred. You can't expect me to believe you don't want something for yourself. Power, wealth, revenge. Everyone wants something. What do you want, Librarian? The question hung in the air like a poisonous cloud, but Kara didn't flinch. She knew what she wanted. She wanted her people back. She wanted justice for the Aller. But more than anything, she wanted to end the Ilmer's reign of terror once and for all. But she wasn't going to tell the scavenger that. You wouldn't understand, she said softly, her eyes narrowing. Now leave, before I change my mind about letting you walk out of here. For a moment, the scavenger looked like it might push its luck further, but something in Kara's expression must have told it not to. Its eyes flicked nervously to the remains of the Ilmer, and it took a small step back. Fine, it muttered, its grin fading into a scowl. But don't think you've seen the last of me, Librarian. There are others out there who know about that book, and they won't be as polite as I've been. With that, the scavenger turned and disappeared back into the shadows, its footsteps quickly fading into the distance. Kara exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her body, but the unease remained. The scavenger's parting words echoed in her mind. Others knew. The galaxy hadn't forgotten about the Aller after all. She looked down at the Librarian once more, its pages filled with the ancient knowledge of her people. The scavenger was right about one thing. This book held power, power that could change the course of the galaxy. But in the wrong hands, it could also bring unimaginable destruction. Kara had been content to hide here for so long, keeping her identity and the secrets of the Aller safe. But now, everything had changed. The Ilmer were hunting her. Humans were reaching out for help. And scavengers, no, opportunists, were circling like vultures, waiting for a chance to exploit the last remnants of her people. She could no longer afford to stay hidden. With a determined breath, Kara gathered what she could from the library's archives. Maps of forgotten worlds, star charts that hadn't seen the light of day in centuries, and most importantly, the hidden records of the Aller's final, desperate plan to defeat the Ilmer. She didn't know if it would work, but it was a start. The galaxy had forgotten the Aller, but Kara would make sure it remembered. She was no longer just a librarian, tending to the ashes of a dead empire. She was the last of the royal family, and it was time to claim her birthright. As she walked toward the exit, a strange calm washed over her. The scavenger's words, the transmission from the human survivors, the knowledge that the Ilmer were still out there, all of it weighed heavily on her shoulders. But there was also something else, a growing sense of purpose. The galaxy had taken everything from her. Now, it was time to take something back. Kara stood before the library's grand exit, the worn Librarian still tucked beneath her arm, the weight of her choices heavy on her shoulders. The dim, artificial lights of the ancient archive flickered overhead, casting elongated shadows of the fallen Ilmer. The room felt colder now, emptier. A place no longer filled with danger, but with the remnants of battles fought and secrets unveiled. For a moment, Kara closed her eyes, letting the quiet settle in her mind. She had defeated the Ilmer, discovered the desperate call of human survivors across the stars, and realized that the scavenger who had tried to manipulate her was merely one of many who still sought the remnants of her people's knowledge. But none of this was over. The signal from the human survivors was still playing in her mind, the man's voice broken and filled with terror. The plea had been raw, filled with a kind of desperation Kara couldn't ignore. They had reached out to this forgotten place, perhaps as a final hope. Perhaps they didn't know who she was. Perhaps they did. But it no longer mattered. She knew what she had to do. With one last glance at the rows of ancient books and the remains of the past, Kara turned to face the door. Her heart beat with the rhythm of determination, not to survive, but to act. To make sure that the knowledge she held wasn't just a relic of a bygone era, but a tool for the future. The scavenger's words had unsettled her, not because of the danger they posed, but because they revealed a truth she had tried to ignore. Power wasn't just something she had to protect. It was something she had to use, before others took it from her. She walked forward, the door sliding open with a quiet hiss. Beyond the threshold was the long-abandoned corridor that led out of the underground labyrinth. The cold, stale air greeted her as she stepped into the hall, the faint hum of the old generators vibrating beneath her feet. But something felt off. Kara's instincts, honed by years of survival, screamed at her to stop. She froze mid-step and glanced back toward the library. The scavenger had fled, but had he truly left? As if on cue, the lights flickered. A shadow moved across the far wall, too fast to be a trick of the eye. Her heart rate quickened. Someone was still here. Her grip on the Librarian tightened as her eyes scanned the dimly lit corridor. There was no sound, no sign of anyone, but she knew. She could feel the presence lurking just out of sight, waiting. Kara took a slow breath. Whoever, or whatever it was, they had underestimated her. She had spent too long hiding, too long pretending to be nothing more than a humble librarian, clutching books and knowledge without wielding the true power behind them. She would not make that mistake again. Without a word, Kara turned and began walking deeper into the library, as if she hadn't noticed anything amiss. Her pace was calm, her demeanor collected, but her senses were sharp, attuned to every detail. She had survived this long by being cautious, by being careful, but this time, she would take a different approach. The lights flickered again, and this time she caught a glimpse of movement, just at the edge of her vision. There was a faint shuffling sound, the kind that could be mistaken for the settling of ancient machinery, but she knew better. She reached the central chamber of the library, the place where the confrontation with the Ilmer had taken place just hours earlier. The bodies were still there, a grim reminder of what had transpired. Kara placed the Librarian on the large wooden table in the center, its faint glow casting an eerie light over the room. And then she waited. For a long moment, there was nothing, just the silence of the library and the quiet hum of its systems. But then, out of the shadows, the scavenger appeared. Kara didn't turn to face him, but she could hear his soft footsteps as he approached, slow and cautious, like a predator stalking its prey. His breathing was uneven, his excitement barely contained. "I knew it," he whispered, his voice tinged with greed. "You couldn't resist, could you?" Kara kept her eyes on the book, her hands resting gently on its cover. "You've been following me," she said, her voice calm, controlled. "All this time." The scavenger's grin widened as he stepped closer. "You think you're the only one who knows the value of what's in here? You've been hiding in this tomb for too long, librarian. Out there, beyond these walls, there are people who would give anything for that knowledge. And I'm going to be the one to deliver it." Kara's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, though there was no humor in it. "You think you understand what's in this book?" The scavenger paused, his eyes narrowing as he sensed something off in her tone. "I know enough," he said cautiously. "The Aller had secrets, powerful ones. Power that can turn the tide of wars, reshape entire civilizations. I can see why you've kept it to yourself for so long. But you can't keep it hidden forever." Kara stood slowly, finally turning to face him. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes calm yet piercing. "Do you really think I've been hiding?" The scavenger faltered, just for a moment. "What do you mean?" Kara took a step closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "If you knew anything about the Aller, about our power, you'd know one simple truth." The scavenger's confidence wavered. "And what's that?" Kara's smile widened, but it wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who had been underestimated for far too long. "Power isn't in the knowledge you steal," she said softly. "It's in the knowledge you understand." Before the scavenger could react, Kara moved. Her hand shot out, not in violence, but in precision, tapping a hidden panel beneath the table. Instantly, the room lit up with holographic displays, ancient symbols and data flooding the air in front of them. The scavenger stumbled back, his eyes wide with confusion. What is this?" he stammered, his bravado gone, replaced with fear. Kara's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of centuries. "This is the last safeguard of the Aller, the final defense of our knowledge. You wanted the secrets of my people? You'll get them." The scavenger's eyes darted around the room, panic setting in as the symbol swirled faster, growing brighter. He lunged for the book, but Kara was faster. With a single motion, she closed the Librarian, and the room fell into sudden silence. The scavenger froze, his hand hovering over the now-closed book. He was breathing heavily, his eyes darting between Kara and the silent, glowing displays. What did you do?" he asked, his voice trembling. Kara stepped closer, her expression calm. "You wanted to unlock the power of the Aller, but you didn't understand that it wasn't about the book. It never was." The scavenger's confusion deepened. "What are you talking about?" Kara tilted her head, her gaze sharp and unyielding. "The power you sought was never in the knowledge itself. It was in knowing when not to use it." The scavenger's eyes widened as the truth sank in. He had been chasing a false prize, blinded by greed and ambition, never realizing that the true power of the Aller wasn't something that could be stolen or traded. It was the wisdom to know when to act and when not to. You tricked me," he whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. Kara's smile was sad, almost pitying. "No, you tricked yourself." The scavenger's face twisted in anger, but before he could lash out, Kara raised her hand. The symbols in the air around them began to glow again, brighter this time, filling the room with a blinding light. "I'm sorry," Kara said softly, her voice filled with a quiet finality. "But you can't be allowed to leave." The scavenger's scream was lost in the brilliance of the light, his form dissolving into the data stream that now surrounded him. In moments, he was gone, consumed by the very knowledge he had sought to exploit. The light dimmed, and the library returned to its stillness once more. Kara stood alone, the Librarian still in her hands. She had made her choice. The knowledge of the Aller, the power that had once ruled the galaxy, would remain where it belonged, guarded, protected, and out of the hands of those who sought to misuse it. There was no longer any need to hide. With a final glance at the ancient book, Kara placed it back on the shelf where it had rested for centuries. The galaxy would remember the Aller, but it wouldn't be through destruction or conquest. It would be through the quiet, steady hands of a librarian who had learned the greatest lesson of all. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to let go. As Kara turned and walked away from the library, the door slid shut behind her, sealing the knowledge of the Aller away once more. This time, for good. The chapter was closed, and there would be no more. The end.